Star Wars Battlefront 2015 is incredibly unappealing at first glance. EA acquires exclusive rights to the Star Wars license for video games, gets one of their most experienced shooty developers, DICE, to make a generic online shooter with a Star Wars skin, and call it Battlefront. Not Battlefront 3, or Battlefront followed by a subtitle, no, just Star Wars Battlefront. So now, a YouTube reviewer who discusses the Battlefront games has to attach the year it came out at the end of it, just to be as clear as possible. The reason why this naming decision is so frustrating, besides being needlessly confusing, is this new Battlefront doesn't feel like the next iteration of that game series, nor does it feel like a remake. This is a reboot, one that doesn't even acknowledge that the Clone Wars existed at all. I still can't believe they had the nerve to call this Battlefront and only include the original trilogy. This would have earned much more goodwill with something as small as the subtitle Galactic Civil War, or better yet, don't even call it Battlefront. Who's to say this couldn't have been its own franchise, completely separate from the original games? EA and DICE are, of course, and they were counting on the nostalgia factor to lure that fanbase into making the purchase. It also seemed like they were using the nostalgia to appeal to the people who didn't like the prequel trilogy. There may be some people out there who don't remember, but the prequels were not well received back in the 2000s. In fact, I may be underselling it here, they were hated by a large portion of the Star Wars fanbase. All that being said, that apparently isn't the reason this game only featured the original trilogy. No, the supposed reason is much stupider.
I don't like sand.
I found a Polygon article that referenced a quarterly earnings call from EA back in 2016. Quote, "You can't make a game in Star Wars that violates the canon of Star Wars," end quote. They go on to mention that since this game was explicitly set during the era of the original trilogy, adding events from films set earlier or later than episodes 4 through 7 would be unfaithful to the franchise. I don't even know what to make of that horseshit, to be honest. If Disney made the call and told them to not include the prequels, so be it, but if not, this seems disgustingly disconnected from reality. You're not preserving the sanctity of the new Star Wars canon by not including the Clone Wars. This is demonstrated by the existence of the sequel to this game, where they included all three eras. The fact that Leia can kill Darth Vader in a heroes versus villains match makes it pretty non-canon as well, right? I understand that they weren't given a lot of time to get this game out the door. 2 years of development time for a game this polished and pretty isn't a lot, and the lack of content speaks for that fact, but still, hearing this as the supposed reason is just insulting. The Clone Wars era isn't the only thing that was absent in this reboot. They didn't include the quintessential Conquest game mode. From my point of view, this is the most baffling decision. I've been criticized in my original Battlefront video for not knowing or understanding how Conquest mode works. The ticket bleed effect, where your enemy reinforcements diminish if you hold fewer command posts than the opposing team, is the standard in Conquest mode. In my embarrassment, I looked up Conquest as a whole, trying to see if it really was in a lot of games I had played. No, it wasn't. The first shooter to have that game mode only came out 2 years prior to the original Battlefront, Battlefield 1942. Wouldn't you know it, that game has the same development studio as Battlefront 2015. The game mode they themselves have popularized, the main method of playing the original Battlefront games, and they didn't include it. There are some game modes that feel reminiscent, such as Droid Run and Drop Zone, but they frankly don't compare to how well-rounded Conquest is. The other obviously missing staple of the Battlefront series is Galactic Conquest. This is pretty annoying, as I've said in the past, one of the reasons I like that game mode is partly due to its simplicity. Its fancy window dressing, hardly affecting the moment-to-moment gameplay after a planet has been selected. While it is true there are less planets in the base game, there are plenty of different maps on those selected planets, meaning they could have definitely slapped something together. Maybe it would be more akin to the original Battlefront, 4 planets instead of 8, and you have to win 2 or 3 times to control said planet. There are so many equipment loadouts and guns available, which isn't something I particularly love in other parts of the game, but could fit right in if you had to buy them in Galactic Conquest. You could argue that without the Conquest game mode, Galactic Conquest wouldn't make any sense. However, even if it was just a deathmatch or something along those lines, I think it would have worked well enough. If they really wanted to get fancy with it, they could have capitalized on the many multiplayer modes Battlefront offers. Maybe when the planet is neutral, the game mode is Supremacy, when it's controlled by the Rebels, it's Walker Assault, or when it's controlled by the Empire, it's Sabotage. However, that last game mode, of course, isn't available in the base game, and Supremacy is online only, but I'll discuss all that later on. Battlefront 2015 also lacks a single-player campaign. At first blush, this may seem like an inherent negative. If you're a fan of the series, this is another thing you'd expect to be in the game that isn't. However, I personally don't think developers need to use resources on a single-player campaign just for the sake of it. If there were other ways to play the game offline to pick up some of the slack, such as Galactic Conquest and Instant Action, I think that would have been fine. That being said, the reason it isn't in the game does irritate me. In their efforts to make as much money as possible, Battlefront 2015 had to release before the new Star Wars film that came out that year. EA Studios' Patrick Sutherland said in an investors meeting in 2016 that, quote, they made the choice of not including a single-player campaign due to time and being able to launch the game side by side with the movie that came out to get the strongest possible impact, end quote. I, as a consumer, don't care how well their profit margins are looking, but even still, the game would have sold hand over fist regardless of if it was released in 2015 or 2016. It was the first Star Wars game in a long time, it looks gorgeous, and it was called Battlefront, a new entry in a series beloved by many. I'm sure there would have been some gamers out there calling EA dumb for not capitalizing on the Star Wars fever pitch, but they really aren't worth listening to if they think a game the budget and size of Battlefront can easily be made in 2 years. Again, even if I don't think a campaign mode is essential for the Battlefront experience, this is blatantly putting money over a finished product. This mentality has been carried over to the DLC as well. After everything I just went through, even though the game clearly wasn't finished, they released a season pass for $20, which included maps and heroes that should have been in the game at launch. A game centered around the original trilogy, and they released it without the Death Star or Bespin maps to play on. They only gave players 6 total heroes to play as, meaning they have to buy the DLC to play as Chewbacca. Shameful. Absolutely fucking disgusting. I don't usually discuss business practices in my reviews, but I don't think it's possible when discussing Battlefront 2015. There was a Rogue One expansion added to the game 1 year after release, around the time that film was in the theaters. It featured a map from the film and 2 of the characters as playable heroes. If you ask me, that's a perfectly fine thing to charge for. That movie didn't even exist when they were making the game, and it not really fitting with the prequel or sequel trilogy makes sense to be in this game, kind of. EA and their infinite wisdom couldn't separate from what is actual DLC quality content and what should have been in the game at launch, or at the very least free to everybody. Most likely they probably could, but again, greed. This is to say nothing about how detrimental splintering your online player base with paid DLC packs is. All of that being said, if you were hoping I would talk about anything from the DLC, I'm sorry to burst your bubble. I'm not spending $20 on a 5-year-old season pass. At least I wasn't going to, but something about doing a review on the game without it seemed disingenuous. Even though it felt like I was throwing my money away, it actually ended up being a really good decision, so I don't regret it one bit, surprisingly. I'll talk more on that later though, we're still just getting started. Now that we've established there's no single-player campaign, no Conquest game mode, and no Galactic Conquest, we can talk about the little they did decide to include for offline players. There are 5 tutorial missions that claim to teach the core mechanics of the game. One of them you fly around Beggar's Canyon and shoot down TIE fighters. One of them you chase rebels on Endor in a speeder bike. One of them you control an AT-ST on Solist. One of them you play as either Darth Vader or the Emperor and take out rebel forces. And the final one has you using a snowspeeder to take out walkers. All of them are good enough, but there's one I'd like to discuss in more detail. The Endor speeder bike chase. This mission is fucking awesome. Zooming around trees, under AT-ATs, and through rebel forces as fast as you can reminds me of Wipeout, which is one of my favorite racing games. As good as it is, it's over within 4 minutes, and it's the only thing like it in the entire game. If this was a taste of what the campaign mode would have offered, which is certainly what it plays like, then maybe that missing campaign could have been really good. The other offline game modes are an outrageously boring deathmatch token drop nonsense, and a Horde-esque survival mode. These are genuinely so bare bones, it more resembles a demo or a proof of concept playable teaser to get fans excited for the real thing. The token drop deathmatch in particular is so boring. You just run around the empty map like a headless chicken until you find the cluster of enemies, you shoot them, and continue on your way. I have no clue how anyone could think the token drop gimmick would be fun, but that's how you score points. You can play this token drop deathmatch as a hero as well, which I guess counts as its own game mode. I'll talk about the heroes more later on, but the one thing I'll say here is how absurd it is that you can't change which hero you're playing as. You make your selection, then the game begins, and until it's over, you're locked using that hero. A game that came out a decade earlier had a hero versus villains mode, and you could change which one you wanted to play as anytime you died. Absolutely nonsense, they wouldn't allow that for this offline game mode. Survival mode is kind of fun, but the sheer lack of innovation or worthwhile gameplay scenarios turn it into something kind of worthless. There are 15 waves of enemies, harder variants get added in after a while, and sometimes you'll see a TIE fighter or an ATST. One of the problems I have with this mode is how uneventful it can feel. Enemies get increasingly harder as you go, however, even though there's only 15 waves, a lot of them feel like filler. The opening wave is supposed to be easy, just a handful of regular soldiers, but there's plenty in the middle that feel just as mundane. Moving past the fact that the game can't seem to count accurately above 5 for some reason, seeing only 5+ enemies in later waves just feels pointless, as if the game is acknowledging this is a side mode that wasn't given much thought or effort, like it too wants it to be over so you can go have fun with the online instead. Nothing about survival mode gives the impression that this was something DICE actually cared about. For example, the drop pods may look like something unique, but of course, there is a drop pod game type for online multiplayer, and they give you 3 items there as well, so they probably just copy and pasted it. The drop pods aren't just annoying when viewing from the reused content lens, they have other, far more substantial problems. When they first drop down, it's at the beginning of a new wave, so you'll have to race the enemy forces there to capture it. So far, so good, that's not terrible. They take a very long time to capture. The idea is you're supposed to defend the pod while the circle is filling up. If you can't defend it and need to retreat, the enemy can claim the pod and you lose out on the rewards. When you successfully capture it, you'll receive items like proximity mines, orbital strikes, rocket launchers, and so on. One of the problems I have with this is the rewards you get from the pod would have been very useful for defending the pod itself. Besides being used on an ATST, I almost felt like I was wasting these items, whereas if I had them while defending something else, I could have used them to help in a goal other than simply staying alive. The biggest flaw, one that I'd have to assume was carried over from the multiplayer without thought or care of how it would affect this mode, is this. Not only do you not know which item you'll be getting until you grab it, if you pick up a different item, the current one you're holding is gone forever. Besides being annoying for the sake of it, this removes what small amount of strategy that could have been found in survival mode. If I could plan around the 3 items I've received from the drop pod, either by knowing what they are before grabbing them, or by being able to swap and drop without it being wasted, I could save a rocket launcher for a vehicle wave, I could save an orbital strike for multiple heavy soldiers, I could use the turrets accordingly, and what have you. Speaking of the turrets, they're the subject of another obvious oversight. Placing a second one down causes the first one to explode. If there was a perfect demonstration to show how fundamentally off-base and uncaring DICE were about its offline content, I'd have to say it's this right here. These types of game modes, where waves of enemies funnel at the player, could be viewed as a mixture between shooter and tower defense. Building up your defenses is part of the fun. As far as I can tell, Gears of War 2 started this trend, which makes sense why it's fairly bare bones, but Gears of War 3 showed that its developers understood the appeal to an extent and allowed the building of traps and turrets. Even Call of Duty World at War, with its Nazi zombie mode, had windows to barricade, a money system, more weapons to purchase, other areas to open, and a whole host of other shenanigans after a while in later games. This next one might sound ridiculous, but if anything just bolsters my point. In Resident Evil 4, the village area has a few set-piece events that allow the player to utilize bookshelves and dressers to block certain pathways. A game that isn't even trying to include the kind of content that Battlefront 2015 offers does it better without even making an express effort to. No, in survival mode, there's none of that. You take the special items that were clearly only designed around the online multiplayer and use them or don't. It doesn't matter what they are, what wave you're on, or if they even make any sense to use in this map. Grab them and use them, you fucking idiot. What's that? You received 2 turrets and 1 drop pod? That sucks, doesn't it? Fuck you, player. We don't care. Why aren't you playing online right now? Have you bought the season pass yet? Because the drop pod is one of the only things that happens in survival besides the regular enemy waves, that being a big missed opportunity squandered the excitement I had for this game mode. The only other occurrences are star card recharges you can grab, and an extra life heart you can chase down when it arrives. Oh right, there are also 5 collectibles on every map. These collectibles show up on the token death matches as well. DICE or EA or whoever the fuck clearly have no idea what makes collectible hunting fun. These look like placeholders for the real thing that they just forgot to swap out before releasing the game. White rotating diamonds, some of them placed in such boring and close-by locations that it almost seems insulting. They didn't even bother to create a custom text blurb for when you collected all 5, it still tells you to collect them all. The effort levels were through the floor on this one. I did somewhat enjoy my time with survival mode, but it obviously lacks depth, and there's no attempt to vary things up, so there's no incentive to play it any more than once or twice. The collectibles certainly aren't a compelling reason, and neither are the diorama figures. All of that is what you could do offline when the game launched. About 8 months later, the developers listened to the fans' negative response to the lack of offline content, and graciously added in Skirmish Mode, which features a whopping 2 of the 12 online multiplayer modes available at the time. This is embarrassing, but also goes to show that DICE really weren't interested in anything that wasn't online multiplayer. Lazy collectibles, dumb game modes that involve tokens, an uninspired survival mode that doesn't offer anything new or unique, and the credits you obtain are mostly rewards for the online portion of the game anyway. What's baffling to me is how easy it would have been to just put in the Blast game mode, which is a regular deathmatch. I can maybe understand not programming their AI to handle heroes, I guess, so remove heroes versus villains and hero hunt, but if they got Walker Assault to work, why not Supremacy as well? If they're going to cave into what the fans were supposedly clamoring for, only providing 2 game modes to play offline definitely didn't meet them even close to halfway. Focusing exclusively on multiplayer isn't inherently a negative, but it definitely weakens the series given the Battlefront name. Just imagine if this wasn't called Battlefront. In case there are people out there that don't like how often I'm comparing this game to the previous Battlefronts, EA and DICE brought this on themselves. There are cases where I think it's appropriate to separate the name from the game itself. For example, Prey 2017 is a phenomenal game that should have been called something very different. However, the only reason this was called Battlefront was to reel in a player base that had been hoping for another mainline game in that series since Battlefront 3 was cancelled. You don't get to reap the sales benefits without being held to the standards of the series' name. Since the online component was the main focus, that's what I'll be spending most of this video talking about. Obviously, I'm very familiar with single-player games, 2D, 3D, action-adventure, third-person shooter, and etc. I have no problem making objective and subjective critiques and appraisals when discussing those types of games, and my channel's catalog reflects that. That being said, I feel like I should explain where I'm coming from in terms of online shooters. When I was in my high school years, I owned an Xbox 360 and lived for Xbox Live. I'd say I've probably put at least 100 hours into each Gears of War game up to the 3rd entry, and probably the same for Call of Duty World at War and Modern Warfare 2. I've also spent a good amount of time with Modern Warfare 1 and Halo 3's online multiplayer. All that being said, I've mostly moved on from enjoying these types of multiplayer shooter games. I say mostly here as, unbelievably, I actually ended up having a great time with the online in Battlefront 2015. Well, that isn't 100% true. It only really started to become fun once I downloaded the Season Pass, but for the most part I had fun. If you're as shocked as I think you might be, don't worry, there's a lot that I didn't like here as well. What's important to note here, though, is that I think the reason I had such a good time with the online is because of how easily my brain slipped back into what I liked a decade ago. If I didn't have that familiarity with these types of Call of Duty shooters, and only had the previous Battlefront games to compare them to in my head, I probably would have had a much worse time. Before I really dig into the specifics, I'll lay down a few comparisons, positive and negative, right now. After going back and playing the first Battlefront game online for reference, a few things stood out to me. 1. Battlefront 2015's pace is so much quicker. Not only can you spawn in and get going immediately, you can also sprint like you could in Battlefront 2. There were loads of times where I would spawn and die moments later, but I think that mostly comes down to how much faster the game is as a whole. However, that being said, not being able to control where you spawn in is pretty annoying. This was one of the biggest benefits of command posts, as they functioned as a spawn location as well as the main objective to victory. Getting shot at or dying immediately doesn't feel as fair when you're relying on the game to place you on the battlefield. 2. The class system from the original games is better for encouraging team-based gameplay. I'll talk about the individuality of the RPG ranking systems and all that in a moment, but one thing is for sure, the older Battlefront games were created with team cooperation in mind, something I talked about in that first video. Each class had something to offer that the others didn't, which not only made them feel unique to play as, but aided the overall team with their strengths. Engineer was the definite support class that could repair droids and give out ammo and health. Sniper was the definite long-range unit that would stay back and lend covering fire. The Assault class was the definite vehicle slayer that could also lay down mines to protect command posts. Regular soldiers had the most well-rounded blaster rifle, which could reliably fire medium to close range, making them perfect for capturing command posts and leading the charge. The specialty units were a bit different depending on the faction, but it all added up to a pretty well-balanced team, regardless of if certain players had spent 100 hours in the game or just 10. Battlefront 2015 reminds me of those Call of Duty games I played in the past, where it encourages individualistic player progression above all else, with only a few ways to aid your team with unselfish play. You can equip healing star cards to be a healer, or anti-vehicle cards, or long-range rifle cards, and etc. It's all there, but without the defined classes, there's really no way of knowing what your teammates will pick. Much more often than not, they'll probably have a shield, a jet booster, impact grenade, a Dioxis grenade, and other random things like that. Your teammates might not have even unlocked some of the star cards necessary to cosplay these roles. None of this is detrimental in a vacuum, but when the original games were created around team-based play, Battlefront 2015 obviously feels very different. 3. Being able to melee attack is good, and unlike a few other online shooters I've played, it doesn't feel overpowered. 4. Being able to go prone isn't a thing in this game either, so it is a shame that only the original Battlefront had that option. Finally, the reloading mechanic isn't something I particularly like in the new Battlefront. Don't get me wrong, when you time it correctly, it is more interactive than waiting for a reloading animation to play out. However, the risk of failing wasn't worth the chance of success. It plays out much like the Gears of War active reload, except there isn't a damage boost if you time it at the perfect spot. If you fail, which is very easy to do after successive correct button presses as the window gets smaller and smaller, the overheating cooldown will take much longer than normal. Simply put, I think it's too harsh of a punishment and should have been removed as a consequence. I like the idea of making the reloading process more interactive, but far more often than not, I simply wouldn't even bother with the minigame, meaning it's just as monotonous as it would be without it. If you would only be given one chance every cooldown to time your button press, but a mistimed attempt would mean the full cooldown played out like normal, I think that would have been the best of both worlds. The main thing that dominates the player's brain in this game will be numbers. The diorama set is of course the most egregious example. Most of the goals there are reaching a certain threshold of points, kills, and sometimes literally hours played. I'm not fucking spending 10 hours in vehicles, fuck off. Seeing a number go higher makes our caveman brains happy for some reason. This has long since been figured out by game developers, and most AAA games these days have some sort of leveling system or incremental increases in stats for your powers and weapons. Sometimes achievements or objectives have arbitrary kill counts as well. Slapping numbers onto things gets people playing longer than they would otherwise. This isn't as exploitative as a gambling simulator or NBA 2K microtransaction bullshit, but I would recommend everyone out there to just be aware of what's going on when you see this kind of stuff. Are you playing because you're having a good time, because the game is engaging on a moment-to-moment level, or do you just want that super rare achievement or your rank to be as high as your friends? Speaking of that, just like those old Call of Duty games I played, Battlefront has a ranking system. You unlock more weapon loadout options as you increase your rank, and the amount of points you receive for your rank is also converted to credits. You can spend your credits purchasing these new loadout options, and etc, etc. Like I said, these ranking systems are a cheap and easy way to get people playing the game longer than they would otherwise. That being said, I don't think Battlefront's ranking system is as bad as the Call of Duty games I played in the past. There's no prestiging system that encourages players to level up to essentially 1000, and other than equipping an alien head, no one else can see your rank, so that isn't something you're likely to be especially proud of, which is good, because it's usually meaningless. In Battlefront, it mostly seems connected to which guns, cosmetics, emotes, and star cards you're able to buy. I would say this is one of those things you either love or hate, but I can see both sides to this. On its face, Battlefront 2015 isn't trying to be a competitive game, like, at all, so it being properly balanced or not doesn't have as much of an impact as it would otherwise. That being said, there are clearly better guns and star cards that you can unlock the more hours you put into the game, and dying repeatedly to people who have them can be very annoying. The whole concept of locking guns and star cards behind a couple dozen hours of play for an online multiplayer game is kind of absurd. If you purchase the game and want to use a specific star card, Like, say, a rifle that actually feels like a sniper, having to jump through hoops and gain a high enough level feels so dirty. The players who simply have more time at their disposal not only get to pick from a wider selection of guns, but also get to clown on newbies with their objectively superior firepower. One might hear this and conclude that the only time everyone is at a level playing field is right at launch, since everyone begins at level 1. However, if you pre-ordered the game, you received the DL-44, a powerful pistol that barely anyone else would have, which would give you an advantage. Eventually, DLC packs were available to purchase that included advanced star cards and weapons that wouldn't unlock until the player was at a pretty high level. It was 5 months after launch that these came out, but that doesn't really matter. This is an admission that some of the weapons and star cards are better than others, and they make the game easier for players with far more time on their hands. So instead of addressing that issue, EA gets to keep the addictive drip feed while also making money by giving you access to things already in the game, but earlier? Looking at the ratings these packs have received from PS4 users is honestly disheartening. Yes, EA, take my $5. I would love to use the guns that you have locked from me. 5 stars. Now, to play devil's advocate yet again, I'm sure unlocking things slowly with the credits they've earned can make players feel good about their customized loadout. Maybe they'll feel more attached to a certain gun because they unlocked it via Hutt contract. I personally can't stand it, yet I can't deny that it does pull me in. Even when I didn't want to use the gun it would eventually unlock, I loved seeing those Hutt contract objectives slowly but surely get completed. However, it's also undeniable that these tasks, rankings, and credits push players to become more self-centered. Sure, there are some Hutt contracts that encourage playing the objective, but if you want to get that spicy new sniper rifle, better ignore the objective and take advantage of this big open map to finally get some kill streaks going. I can also acknowledge to some degree how these contracts could be beneficial. It could push players to use guns and equipment that often get overlooked and undervalued, and who knows, they may end up liking that thing they would have otherwise ignored. I will admit that it worked on me with the targeting rifle and scout pistol. Initially, I never thought I would be able to get 15 scout pistol kills, or obtain a single targeting rifle kill streak, but I learned how to use them both, I started enjoying them, and I felt kind of sad when I was done with them. It was time to move on to a new set of tasks, another few boxes to check, one more set of arbitrary goals that might make me ignore what the game mode is and try to get kills with a certain gun. All that being said, I think progression systems are generally bad for online games, but with how addicting they are and how much of a mainstay they've become, I doubt they'll be going away anytime soon. As far as the Hutt contracts as a whole go, I do like them, but there are some nuances that kind of got on my nerves. Perhaps when the game was popping off in 2016 it was no big deal, but locking a few of them behind playing the objective in a DLC game mode kind of sucks. For example, the EE4 requires 10 generator defense events to unlock. This can only occur in the Sabotage game mode, which is only playable in the Bespin DLC. The Bespin DLC is segregated off into its own section, it has its own isolated player base separated from everything else. At this point, seeing enough people in that DLC is rare, and if I didn't have a few lucky nights of getting more than 1 or 2 people in that playlist, I'm not sure if I could have ever earned the EE4. The same goes for the Death Star playlist. It's hard to win a Battle Station game when I can never find anyone in that DLC. As a contrast, there's a Hutt contract where you have to kill a certain number of enemies with a pistol in the Blast game mode. That's a game type that appears in all of the DLC as well as the base game playlists, so that felt completely fair. Another annoyance of the Hutt contracts is the fact that you have to pay to activate them. It can be frustrating seeing that, even though you got 3 targeting rifle streaks for a Hutt contract already, this new one you bought demands that of you once more. You can have as many activated at a time as you'd like, so it really comes down to prioritizing your credits on these contracts, trying to avoid the scenario where you'll have to redo the tasks you just did, but for a different contract. You also can't see what the gun does before acquiring it, which is annoying and dumb, since of course people can just look it up online if they really wanted to, so you may as well save everyone the hassle and put it in for reference. The text blurb doesn't provide anything tangible, instead it hints at something that's far more interesting than what's currently in the game. It says if you fail, you'll never be safe in the Outer Rim, but you can't fail them. Like, not at all. It could have been interesting if the Hutt contracts worked closer to how the text talks about, where if you don't accomplish your mission in a given time frame, you'll be hunted down by other players for a bounty or something. Maybe if you give up on a Hutt contract, or don't achieve it in a 3-day window, the next 10 games you'll have a red outline around your character that can be seen through walls, making it easier for opponents to take you out. That might sound ridiculous, and it is to an extent, but at least it would be something more akin to the risk of working for Jabba the Hutt than just paying for all of his contracts and never seeing any negative effects even if you don't do them. Finally, my last general grievance with the Hutt contracts, and all of the objectives that require a certain number of kills with a specific gun, is how the game recognizes who got the kill. I remember back in my younger years, kill stealing was a serious thing to get pissy over. It's extremely dumb, but if you cared about your kill to death ratio, doing most of the damage and having someone else take the kill was akin to them teabagging your still warm dead body. Shooter games have since given partial points to players who did damage to the enemy before the final blow, which is what happens in Battlefront. You'll get 100 points from the assist, but the thing is, I don't give a fuck about points. If I'm desperately trying to get targeting rifle streaks, or heavy blaster kills, or generator defense events, or what have you, a kill is the only thing that matters to that Hutt contract objective. It doesn't matter that I did 99 damage to the enemy, the player that dealt the last 1 tick of damage is what matters. There's only 2 ways I could see this issue being fixed. 1. Remove every objective and Hutt contract so getting kills with particular guns is never something you'll need to do. I doubt people would like that, and I'm not so sure if I would either. 2. Change how the assists work and count them alongside regular kills in the objectives and Hutt contracts. Maybe only count an assist if the player did more than 50 points of damage, then as long as you did the brunt of the work, the person who finished them off doesn't essentially take away your in-game reward. With that in mind, perhaps increase the number required so it still results in the same amount of effort, only now you'll be properly rewarded more consistently as you play. Just to recap, assists wouldn't count as kills on the scoreboard, they would count for the Hutt contracts and other objectives, and assists would then require 50 or more ticks of damage to count in the first place. I feel like that would effectively solve the issue, but I'm not necessarily sure everyone else would agree. The star cards in the game essentially represent your equipment loadout minus your main blaster. The L1 and R1 cards are the more basic secondaries that have a cooldown timer after each use. The star cards that occupy the middle selection also have a cooldown after each use. However, they also have an ammo count. Bafflingly, the ammo recharges aren't granted to you every time you spawn in. No, they are item pickups on the map, and here's the really silly part, that number carries over from game to game. Each individual type of middle star card has its own set of ammo independent from the rest. One could be at 30 uses because you barely use it, and one may be at 0. If you're at 0 at the end of one game, you'll be at 0 at the beginning of the next. If you do nothing but run around and collect star card recharges the entire game, you could consider your time not being completely wasted, as you'll have an abundance of them for the future. For the players like me who didn't want to use their precious credits on recharges instead of Hutt contracts or better equipment, this is a very frustrating system. If anything, it heavily rewards players that have an abundance of credits, which obviously are the players who have spent more time with the game. Since we're on the topic of star cards, I'll talk about a few of them right now. There are a lot, and going through all of them just for the sake of the video feels like a waste of time. The Backdoor Grenade is great simply because it brings you closer to a few of your allies. It overhealing you to 130 is nice, and throwing it when in tight situations can get you out of a jam, but I found myself enjoying it more when I could throw it into a group of allies and feel like I genuinely helped my fellow soldiers. The Backdoor Droid is similar, although its nostalgic and frankly gorgeous appearance doesn't win out against the Backdoor Bomb's efficiency. The Jump Pack provides some versatility and speed, which means you can use it as a quick boost to get to a location faster, or more interestingly, get to high up vantage points. I initially really didn't like the Jump Pack because all it did early on was remind me of how much I missed the Dark Trooper and Clone Trooper jetpacks from the old games. I still think those are much more interesting, and I do miss them, but I've accepted at this point that this is a different game. My favorite thing to do with them was equip a bowcaster, begin charging it in mid-air, then land and take out any suspecting players. It barely ever worked, but when it did, I was a superhero. In addition to missing the real jetpack troopers, I at first also missed the real sniper class from the previous games. I didn't like that you had to basically construct a quasi-sniper star card hand and equip a targeting rifle to feel like a sniper. However, when I actually did make a custom star card hand that included the cycler rifle and pulse cannon, I had a really great time. Those two both recharge pretty quickly, so I could usually swap between them without problems. If not, the targeting rifle honestly wasn't so bad once I got the hang of it. It's just incredibly dumb that they locked the cycler rifle away, which in turn locks the Hutt contract for the more powerful one-shot targeting rifle away as well until level 30. If a player who mainly played as a sniper in the previous games could turn on Battlefront for the first time and use the pulse cannon and cycler rifle, I bet they would have felt more at home. Both guns are very interesting in their own way. The pulse cannon is much stronger if you charge it up, but once you start charging the shot, there's no going back. It will shoot no matter what. Unless you melee attack to interrupt the process, that is. If you aren't standing still, the pulse cannon is wildly inaccurate, which was pretty funny to get used to. I also like how you can spot when someone is aiming it at you, as the green laser is pretty distinct. The cycler rifle is noted to be a crude, non-laser variant of a sniper rifle. That being the case, it can effectively shoot through blast shields. Both StarCard snipers being so different actually made my time with my quasi-sniper build more fun than any I can remember with the sniper class in the previous games, besides maybe using the recon droid. The personal shields themselves are something I don't like very much. It just seems really cheap that someone can turn on their shield and that's that, they get to escape. It is good that there are counters to the shield, such as the cycler rifle that I talked about, melee attacks in general, the bow rifle staff insta-kill melee attack, and the Dioxis grenade. Speaking of the Dioxis grenade, that's the card I have the most problems with, even though it's one I personally like quite a lot. More than the scatter shot or the secondary fire, the Dioxis grenade is the cheapest thing in the game. Let me be clear here, I think it's really neat. The poison gas slowly taking away enemies' health and going through shields is really cool. However, it's way too strong and can go through walls and floors. It's so overpowered that you can effectively remove a point of entry the enemy could have used for 5 to 10 seconds. No one will dare run through it since it's so damaging, so it's essentially an extremely easy to use and quickly recharging choke point simulator. I have had moments where I got crafty and used it effectively, like in a dead-end hallway in the Death Star to trap someone, so that is fun, but it lasts too long and results in so many easy kills with little effort. It's remarkable how many points you can rack up just by throwing it into a crowded area. In terms of balancing, the worst is when you get someone on a higher floor, spamming them down on you and your allies, since it can go through the ceiling. I'll talk about this particular death pit again later, but on one of the Bespin maps, you can spawn kill the opposing team into oblivion. It's obviously a cheesy strategy, and you can tell just by seeing how the enemy equipped their cards. 2 Dioxis grenades in one hand. That's beyond OP, especially considering how often you need to defend a specific spot on the map for some game modes. Ignoring the balancing issue, they aren't visually clear without seeing the grenade itself. Even though the symbol near the ground may be blue or red, no matter what, the gas is green. There were many times I couldn't see the grenade, so I just waited for it to go away, even though it could have been my teammate's Dioxis gas. I just think it could have been more clear if the gas was a different color depending on if it will damage you or not. Like I said, I do like the Dioxis grenade, but it causes confusion and is way too powerful. Besides the 2 sets of hands you brought in, you'll also have access to whichever hand your partner is using. This is one of the few ways the game encourages teamwork, and for me, it was a monumental success. You will more often than not be randomly assigned a partner in each match, and their color will be yellow instead of blue, so you can always spot them. You can use their currently equipped star cards, even if you aren't even close to unlocking them yourself yet. You can spawn in right next to your partner if they aren't taking damage. Sometimes that leads to instantly dying because the game couldn't judge the situation properly, but that isn't a big problem. If they were crouching when you spawned in, you will be crouching as well, which is a great touch. If an enemy takes out your squad mate, killing the player who did it even gets you some extra points. That's nice. This partnership, I think, goes a long way in bringing you closer to your team as a whole. You certainly don't have to stick by their side, but if you do, the camaraderie of having someone's back, going in as a unit, it feels like an attempt at letting you cosplay the role of a team player without using voice chat. It's perfect for people who generally play these online team-based games solo, and who knows, maybe somewhere out there, in the millions of people playing, 2 people actually became friends through this system. I just like it a lot, and I really hope it's in the sequel. As far as the guns are concerned, I don't like how many there are in the first place. I prefer games that only have a few weapons, but they all feel sufficiently different from one another. In the old Battlefront games, the pistol felt different from the blaster rifle, same with the sniper, rocket launcher, and shotgun. Obviously, this is an online shooter, one where the focus is on slow player progression to unlock slightly different guns. That being said, even though plenty of guns were locked behind higher levels, there were also examples of 2 guns that were similar, but good for specific uses. You need to get kills with the EE3 to eventually unlock the EE4, and I figured it would be the case of the EE4 just being outright better, but it's thankfully not so cut and dry. The EE3 shoots out a burst of 3 shots at a long range, while the EE4 shoots a burst of 2 shots that do more damage, but the gun has less range overall. This means both have their advantages, and depending on the map and game type, could be beneficial to someone's playstyle. Again, going back to the Hutt contracts and all that, I did like that I was being encouraged to try out lots of different ways to play. Maybe I would have stuck to regular blaster rifles instead of trying out some of the pistols, targeting rifles, and heavy blasters out there. There are also some very unique ones, like the night vision blaster pistol that Lando uses, the awesome targeting rifle that Bossk uses, Krennic's revolver-like gun, Jyn Erso's configuration pistol, and the insta-kill melee bow rifle as well. Lots of cool stuff in here, but like I said, I still prefer the older games when it comes to weapon loadouts. The other items in the game, the ones you acquire on the map as a token, I've already touched on slightly in the offline section with survival mode. It makes more sense why you wouldn't be able to see them before you grab them in online multiplayer, as there are some that are far better than others, and if they were in set locations, people would camp out and wait until they spawn. The thermal imploder, infantry turret, and smart rocket were my favorites. Even though it can be annoying when used against you, the fact that you can put the turret in strange locations is pretty cool. However, whenever I tried to put it in cool locations, the game was very picky. On Scarif, on top of this building is a no-go, but I eventually got it to stick angled downward at the trees. Perfect. The thermal imploder creates a big explosion, but the best part is the extremely satisfying sound it gives off. There's also a strange phenomenon with the thermal imploder where you may think you've survived a close call, but you'll drop dead after a short delay. I don't know what to make of it, and it happened quite often. The card refresh pickup was one I absolutely hated, using it as quickly as possible whenever I grabbed it. However, after a while I could see its usefulness when paired with the bowcaster, certain grenades, or even double snipers. At first I didn't like the blaster cannon, but certain game modes showed me how valuable it could be. Being able to use the shield, turrets, blaster cannons, and proximity bombs to defend a location not only feels like you're using these items to their full potential, but the free form and unrestricted nature of how these items function normally make it a far more organic gameplay decision than it would otherwise. This is how survival mode should have felt, like you're building up your defenses in your own way. The blaster cannon is also pretty decent for controlling choke points, and being a complete nuisance from far away, such as the time when an enemy planted one high up in one of the Outer Rim maps. We had quite the long-range battle, going back and forth, trading a few lives. It was a lot of fun. The vehicles aren't on the map for you to hop into like before, they're also an item token that has to be picked up and activated. If the developers weren't going to at least randomize the chance to control a vehicle for all players, I don't understand why the vehicles themselves couldn't have existed on the map already. Instead of running to a token, the player could run to the vehicle and hop in. The only thing I can think of is perhaps with how frequently you'll come across vehicles that act as a decorative piece, some being usable while others just acting as an oversized paperweight could cause some confusion. If that is the case, that certainly wasn't on their mind when it came to which doors would and wouldn't open. You could argue that they shouldn't have prioritized the map over the accessibility of the vehicles. However, you could also argue that vehicles not being available to the player would make sense. Who's to say every speeder has gas, every X-Wing is functional, every Millennium Falcon has its keys in it? If they weren't going to make it believable, the vehicles may as well have been given out randomly instead of acquired on the map in token form. Speaking on that topic, the heroes are handled in the most brain-dead way imaginable. I like them a lot when playing heroes versus villains, but in Walker Assault, Sabotage, Supremacy, and other explicitly normal modes, it's a fucking travesty. Not only is the act of acquiring them very silly, with the pickups just appearing in areas of the map, they're beyond overpowered. If you see Luke coming at you, you have a less than 0 chance of survival. He's going to one-hit kill you because of course he is. At times, the game consisted of spawning in and dying to Luke repeatedly over and over, because that's what the game is for some reason. It's a power fantasy for the people who happen to have grabbed the hero pickup when they showed up on the map. If we compare heroes strictly to how they played in the original Battlefront 2, At least in that game, it awarded the opportunity to a player who was either playing well, playing poorly, or sometimes randomly if that's what the settings were. That's genuinely what they should have done here, award the opportunity to players at random. I remember when the game first released, and there would be people doing nothing but waiting for a hero pickup to spawn. I don't see it as often now, so I'm assuming the hero tokens appear in a few set randomized locations, opposed to the same one all the time. Either way, with 40-player games, the chance you'll be able to find it before someone else who is intentionally dicking around to get it is extremely slim. In the big game modes, I honestly don't even understand the point of heroes at all. It's as if the entire Battlefront community agrees to sacrifice their lives over and over just so one lucky player can mow down dozens of soldiers without a problem. Yay, you can kill a bunch of regular players! I bet that's really fun for them. I'm having fun. Can't you see my kill count go up? Is this pod racing? With the ability to play in overpowered vehicles like the AT-AT, and the absolute cheese that is the hero tokens, your kill to death ratio has never mattered less. Discussing the heroes in more detail, every time I pick up a hero token, the first thing I think about is how annoying it is to see a cutscene of them entering the battlefield. I don't know if this is masking some load screen or what, but it's irritating that it always plays. Luke is overpowered beyond belief. He's so quick, and of course his kill streak trait increases his sprinting speed, so he at times flies all around the map. It's pretty telling that in hero hunt mode, he's always the one chosen if he's available. His force push just instantly killing you is just fucking dumb, straight up. Anyway, I like that Han has a shoulder charge attack, if only because I think it's funny to see it deal damage to other heroes somehow. Leia plays more like a support class, which is very interesting. You could maybe argue that's what she was in Battlefront 2, but if that's the case, Battlefront 2015 definitely took that idea and ran with it. She has a force shield, and can drop supplies down for other players, like smart rockets or droids. She also allows friendly players to spawn in as an Alderaan Honor Guard, which is a set class that is stronger than regular soldiers that carry smart rockets and homing shots. This same mechanic is carried over to the Emperor as well, with the Imperial Royal Guards, and Director Krennic with 2 Death Troopers. It's a really cool feature, one that I enjoyed, but couldn't help but see it as yet another thing the Hutt contract objective stood in the way of. I've already talked about how absolutely nonsensical and greedy it was for DICE to not include Chewbacca as one of the playable heroes at launch, so I won't divulge into that again. Apparently the development team ran into some issues when they were creating him, so that's why he showed up so late in the season pass. He's a pretty fun character, albeit pretty fucking powerful to play against. His bowcaster shooting more and more shots as your trait level increases is pretty neat. He has a slam attack, which is great as that was something I even talked about in my original Battlefront video, how the Wookiees didn't have any visceral melee attacks. Nien Nunb is my least favorite hero out of them all, and that's simply because he looks exactly the same as a normal rebel with that alien head. There were so many times I thought I was looking at a hero but wasn't, and vice versa. Was this intentional? Am I the only one who consistently got confused by this? It's ridiculously silly, and I hope I'm not being racist or something by not being able to tell a regular Celestian from Nien Nunb. His turret thing is cool. It works differently than regular turrets as it gets more powerful as Nien Nunb deals damage to enemy villains. He has proximity mines, but he apparently gets an orbital strike on larger game modes, which I never saw because the few times I actually got into a large game mode lobby, and the even fewer times I grabbed a hero token, and the 50-50 chance I was playing as the rebels, I probably picked Lando or Han Solo instead, because, you guessed it, there's a Hutt contract for getting kills with Lando and Han Solo. Are you seeing a pattern here? It's funny how so many issues in Battlefront can culminate into a single thing, like never seeing his orbital strike myself in online multiplayer. Lando is pretty great, as he comes equipped with the X8 Night Sniper blaster pistol, which is so fucking cool. His shocking trap ability is also pretty clever. It's a decoy item pickup that shocks you when you grab it. If you're smart and see that Lando is on the battlefield, and if you know the locations of the pickups normally, you'll know to avoid them, so it's not as unfair as it looks on the surface. Even though it has the same properties as the Star Card Shock Grenade, it seems like you need to mash the square button a lot more to break yourself free, so it ends up killing regular soldiers more often than not. Jyn Erso, someone I doubt anyone actually cares about as a character, was included for the Rogue One DLC. That being said, I'm sure a lot of people care about her as a playable hero because she's rad as hell. Her blaster pistol and rifle attachment are powerful, but what I cared about was her trait. When leveled up, it gives her more strikes for her truncheon surge. Basically, exactly what I complained about in my Dead Rising 3 video. However, unlike how I felt about it in Dead Rising 3, I love that the move assist snaps to a new enemy in this game. As one of the tools in her arsenal unique to her, it's powerful in a way that separates her from the rest, allowing her to take down a big group of soldiers. For the villains, the counterpart to Luke's extreme cheesy quickness is surprisingly the Emperor. Even if I hadn't used them firsthand, when you see everyone pick one particular hero every chance they get, it's easy to see which ones are better than others. He has a twirly dive, which can dramatically speed his movement up. He can also produce a hero token that either heals him or an allied villain. This just feels ridiculously overpowered. In Hero Hunt, it felt like he could stay alive forever. I also think his lightning attacks are too powerful. Against regular soldiers, it's meant to be strong, but if you're a hero and bump into him in a dark alley, there's no running away, he's going to kill you. I kind of like that he doesn't have a lightsaber. However, since this game only features original trilogy heroes and villains, there only being 2 in the whole game that wield a lightsaber feels so wrong. Maybe instead of fucking Nien Nub, Ben Kenobi could have been a hero. The only other lightsaber user besides Luke Skywalker is, of course, his brother, Darth Vader. He comes equipped with his classic saber throw and force choke abilities. His trait is more suited towards tanking damage, as his defenses go up as it increases in level. Even though I'm not very good with him, there's something about playing as Vader that just feels really good. When playing Boba Fett, it made me miss the Jet and Dark Troopers all over again, since flying around instead of getting a boost is so much more fun. Greedo is the counterpart to Nien Nub from the Outer Rim DLC. His trait is his confidence, which affects which grenades he can use. It starts off with a Dioxis, then works all the way up to a Thermal Imploder. It's kind of neat, I guess. However, the fact that the Death Troopers that spawn in with Krennic have a Thermal Imploder right away makes me feel that Greedo is severely underpowered. He has a better scan pulse ability and an auto-fire thing when there's multiple targets out in the open, even though I never got to use them. Greedo to me is a perfect example of how pointlessly obscure the abilities for the heroes and villains are. There's a small description on the select screen which might tell you something useful or it might not. Then you just get symbols in the corner. For the longest time, I had no fucking idea what Greedo's triangle or R1 abilities were, since I tested them out in safe areas and nothing happened. You could make the argument a player should be testing them out in the offline hero modes, and that's fair enough, but with how online focused this game is, it's abnormal to think you should be anywhere else besides in the multiplayer screen. Dengar is the counterpart to Lando for the Bespin DLC. I actually had no idea who this idiot was until I looked him up. He was apparently one of the random other bounty hunters from Empire Strikes Back. However, I've only been able to find him in pictures of that scene. At the end of the day, far more of his screen time was actually in the Clone Wars TV show. Ironic. At this point in the season pass, the villains are really being stretched thin. Greedo was already pushing it, since he has one scene in the original trilogy, and most of his screen time is with the Clone Wars TV show as well. Besides him, I get the impression that DICE got a hold of these pictures and randomly selected 2 of the bounty hunters. That's fine, but picking this dingus over this cool-looking killer droid is a travesty. IG-88 deserves better. Anyway, Dengar as a whole is pretty boring. His Hurricane Strike is kind of cool, where he rushes forward and smacks people with his blaster. Apparently this could instantly kill Luke before a patch fixed it, which is hilarious. His grenade spam charge is a thing that's kind of unique too. I don't know, maybe he is good and I just can't get over how lame of an inclusion he is to utilize him properly. Bosk is far more interesting thanks to his predatory instincts, which gives him thermal vision. I'm a sucker for this kind of thing, and with this activated, all of his other abilities apparently improve as well. Just look at how fast he gets. His Relby is a very powerful rifle. You can shoot grenades out of it, which is pretty cool. And he has a useful escape tactic where he throws down a stronger Dioxis grenade and hops away. His trait is tied to getting health back with every kill. Overall, a really fun villain to play as, but not fun at all to play against. Finally, there's Director Krennic, a name I have literally never had to think about prior to making this video. He's more like Leia than the Emperor is, funny enough. He deploys a droid which has a shield, and that droid releases Dioxis gas if enemies get too close. He can throw out a symbol on the ground which buffs everyone around him, and his blaster pistol can be changed to a single-shot armor breaker, which is basically an insta-kill on regular soldiers. I can't help but mention that every now and then, some glitch will happen with heroes where it changes their appearance. One time the Emperor had the appearance of Nien for some reason, and one time Chewbacca looked like this. I'd like to believe everyone else could see this monstrosity as well, but I can't be sure. As far as the game modes go, I think there are too many in general, and a lot of them are too similar to one another. Droid Run and Drop Zone both have you capturing a certain location on the map. In one of them there are always 3 points and they move around slightly. In the other, once one is captured, more drop pods spawn on the map in different locations. Both of these are analogous to Conquest mode, just not as good. I don't mind them as a side thing for a more relaxing time though. I do like that Droid Run uses droids as the point of interest. I think that makes a lot of sense and is visually interesting. Cargo is just capture the flag, Blast is a deathmatch, Fighter Squadron is a deathmatch except you're in flying vehicles. The ship combat isn't something I'll talk about too much, but I think it was smart to give the lock-on and gunfire an overheat and cooldown, so you have to be watchful of both as you go. That being said, I'm just not very fond of vehicles in the first place, so this type of game is more of a tertiary change of pace for me. It's unfortunate then that the Fighter Squadron game mode takes so fucking long to finish. Since you're just flying around shooting at ships, the fun wears off long before someone finally wins. For the hero modes, there's Hero Hunt and Heroes vs. Villains. Hero Hunt is a god-awful game mode. Truly, truly terrible. It can hold up to 12 players, so there will be 1 hero and 11 regular soldiers chasing and firing at them. The soldier that dealt the most damage will become the hero next. The damage they recorded zeroes out but carries over for everybody else, to make sure people are playing the objective and not goofing off. There's 2 completely separate reasons why this game mode is terrible. Firstly, in my opinion, it's not fun to play at all. You'll mostly be going up against Luke or the Emperor. They run around the map, you chase them all over, maybe get a few shots in or you die, repeat for 10 minutes. Because Luke and the Emperor are the most overpowered and most often selected, the fact that you can't choose a hero that was just chosen by someone else feels pretty cheap. If anything, it gives an advantage to every other person, the one who can pick the overpowered character. When playing as a soldier, it becomes monotonous chasing the hero, but when playing as the hero, it's almost just as dull. Running around the map to me is extremely boring, so either I adhere to the meta in hopes of winning, or I try to have fun and get ganged up on. That's one reason why I don't like the game mode, it's not very fun for me. The other reason is more concrete and objective. There's a timer at the top of the screen, but there's also a threshold of kills as a hero which will give you the win instantly. If a player gets 50 kills, they win without anyone else getting their few minutes of fun. If it comes down to who had the highest amount of points at the end of the timer, if the player who is in the lead is playing as the hero, the game is done. If it's a different player, the game doesn't end. Instead, it waits until that player dies, or they score more than the current leading player and win the game. If you aren't seeing how broken this system is, let me lay it out for you. The timer elapses, the player with the most points is desperately trying to kill the current hero so they can keep their victory. The player who is the hero is desperately trying to survive and get more points so they can steal the victory. The 10 other players are, I'm assuming, supposed to feel it's their duty to roleplay someone who gives a shit, joining in on the fight against the current hero. It essentially comes down to which of the 2 players will get the victory, which isn't something the other 10 people care about, so for them, it actually comes down to which person winning will end the game the quickest. Either that, or run around farming star cards. Fuck this game mode, it's terrible, and the fact that you need to win 10 matches to get a certain diorama piece tells me that a lot of people suffered through this trash, playing something they hate, so they can feel like they've completed the game. Out of all of the numbers garbage in this game, this one irritates me the most because I know people spent hours of their life trying to get this worthless airspeeder figure. It's just such a bad game mode, and why would you make people play it? Jesus Christ, it's just so stupid. The Heroes vs. Villains mode is a lot better, however in the base game I don't think it's quite as good as it is in the DLC variants. The base game has to limit the heroes and villains to 3 each side, since they were only 3 when the game launched. Now there's 7, and the DLC modes allow 4 on each side. 8 players in total, 4 as the overpowered monstrosity, 4 as a regular soldier. My main complaint of this game mode is how the rounds are timed. There's 3 minutes to wipe out the opposing team's heroes and protect your own, but if the timer runs out, whichever team has the most heroes alive wins the round. However, if there's an even number on both sides, like 1-1, it's a draw. I understand if you're at low health and the opponent isn't, maybe it would be smart to run away and hope for a draw, but that's such a dumb waste of time and should have never been a thing in the first place. Much more often than not, the round is likely 10 seconds from being over naturally when the draw happens. Speaking of that draw issue, the same thing happens in Cargo when it's 5-5. Even though you just spent the last 10 minutes in this mode, the game doesn't care, it doesn't have an overtime, it's just done, it's a draw. Boy, that feels great. Supremacy, Walker Assault, and Turning Point are all 40-player game modes, and all of which feature some sort of defend the point of interest gameplay. With how many ways DICE created the variation of defend this specific part of the map, I think they just liked fucking with their fans who wanted Conquest mode. I do think Walker Assault is kind of neat, how everyone's attention turns to the AT-ATs during a few points. It feels like a climactic moment in a bigger battle. There are a few more game modes, but they all take place in the Season Pass. So, without further ado, let's finally talk about it. The Season Pass, something I almost didn't buy, got me to finally enjoy the game to its fullest. The added variety of maps, game modes, and extra star cards and guns really rounds out the whole experience. Without the Season Pass, I'd say this game is pretty mediocre. With the Season Pass, I'd say it's still not as good as the previous Battlefront games, but now the vision for this new iteration starts to make a little more sense. The Outer Rim DLC includes Extraction, essentially an escort mission where the rebels try to make it out with supplies while the Empire tries to stop them. The maps added are a Celestian refinery, pipelines, Jabba's palace, and Palace Garage. All of them are gorgeous and have interesting layouts. I especially like this trend of subverting our expectations with these familiar maps. Jabba isn't there, the Rancor is dead, Han has been freed, and the palace seems to have been abandoned. The Bespin DLC also doesn't feature a frozen Han, unlike the first game. Admittedly, Han being frozen still wouldn't make any sense if you could play as him on that map, but then again, you could play as any hero and have any interaction on any map, so this just points to this not following canon in any way, much to DICE and EA's dismay. This DLC features the game mode Sabotage, which doesn't feel that different from a few of the others in the base game, but it's not bad. The rebels set the charges and attempt to blow all three up. If they do, defend the extraction point. The Empire, of course, tries to defuse the charges, and so on. There are 3 maps in this DLC, and the color palettes are outstanding for all of them. I'll talk about the visuals in a bit, but I have to quickly point out how great the variety is for these Bespin maps. One is an extremely spacious battlefield set in the day with sleek interiors. One is a high-up palace, baked in the orange soft glow of sunset with bright white interiors. The last one is completely indoors. It has cramped solid red hallways, slightly more open battle zones with a mix of dark colors and shadows, tight tunnels with light brights all around, and finally the carbon freezing rooms themselves, which are even more spacious, sometimes completely dark, sometimes glowing orange. I love all 3 of the maps for different reasons, but I hate one aspect of the carbon freezing chamber more than anything else. Most maps don't have definite spawn areas, as the other team could camp out and kill enemy players unfairly. For the maps that kind of have it, they try to prevent spawn kills by not allowing the opposing team to enter into that area of the map, either killing players who go too far, or keeping certain doors closed so the opposing team can't enter them. However, since the Dorkaxe grenade doesn't play by anyone's rules, and Luke can sneak into an area that's off limits for him, this death pit was the end result. This seems to only happen to the Empire side, and only in the Sabotage game mode. What this means is the rebels can trap all the enemy forces in this room, killing them with Luke or by simply spamming grenades from above, all while the rebels destroy the 3 gas generators without any issues. You can even see that once the objective has been completed for them, the Empire finally gets to spawn somewhere else so the game can continue. Lastly, for the Bespin DLC, you can also play Fighter Squadron around Cloud City. I like how you can go between the structures. The hitboxes are pretty tight, the only exception being these small cables that you can fly right through. The Death Star DLC was one that was very elusive. This is a 6-year-old game, so the player base is very thin these days. Sometimes I would be staring at this loading screen for a half an hour, hoping one of the DLCs had enough players. Outer Rim was the only exception. I could find a full lobby almost every time I looked for one. I'm assuming that's because all of the game modes in that playlist cap out at 8 players per team. Bespin, Death Star, and Scarif need more players per team to begin, and thus were almost always barren. There was a magical night where I finally got to play the Death Star, and when I loaded in and saw that there were enough players, I literally screamed in excitement. The anticipation and hype didn't lead to a disappointing play session either. The Death Star maps themselves are incredible to look at, and the new game mode, Battle Station, was something that completely caught me off guard with its structure and how it plays out as a whole. It begins as a space battle, defend the Star Destroyer as the Empire, take it out as the Rebels. It reminds me of the Assault game mode from Battlefront 2, where you take out certain areas of the big frigate. It then shifts to inside the Death Star, where the Rebels have to escort R2-D2 and escape. Finally, if they accomplish that, it transitions to the Trench Run. I've only played this section as the Rebels twice, and it's truly baffling. I imagine you're supposed to fly through the nooks and crannies of the Death Star to find the thermal exhaust port, but it's pretty unclear on where you should be going. Weaving through the cramped trenches and managing the tight turns is very fun. I just wish there was some demonstration or tutorial on where the thermal exhaust port is for when you get selected for the trench run besides just a yellow checkpoint. Battle Station is a big step in the right direction. It tells a digestible, contained story in a 3-part structure and successfully combines space and land combat in a single match, something I can't say for any other game mode. That is, until the Scarif DLC. Infiltration also features a 3-part structure, starting in space, either defending, controlling, or attacking the U-Wings. Once one of the U-Wings reaches the destination, a ground battle begins where the Rebels try to blow up one of the 2 transport ships to cause a distraction. If that's accomplished, then the Rebels try to get a data file to the extraction point. This final phase can be over very quickly, as there are 3 potential carriers, and if the defending team only focuses on 2 of the 3, that third one can sprint to victory in under a minute. I think the ratio of 1 space to 2 land battles is the way to go. I do like the Death Star Battle Station, but if you play it a few times in a row, it's a lot of space combat. However, I will say that the pacing is better for Battle Station if you play it once. Having a land map sandwiched between 2 space ones feels better than 1 space followed by 2 land. That being said, since Battle Station usually plays back to back, one as Rebels and one as the Empire, it will essentially be space, land, space, space, land, space. It's just too much space combat for my liking. Even though I do like a few of these game modes, many of them don't offer interesting objectives for both teams. One side gets to have a dynamic goal, something to work towards, and the other just hopes they can last long enough for the timer to hit 0. Seeing the game tell you that if the timer runs out, you win doesn't inspire a lot of confidence and is generally kind of boring. Not only that, sometimes even getting the timer down to 0 isn't enough. During the trench run section of Battle Station, if the Rebels are close enough to the thermal exhaust port, the game keeps going to allow this last attempt. Getting the timer down to 0 is the only goal the Empire has, so it not even being a concrete victory state feels incredibly cheap. It is good that each additional phase of both game modes adds a fixed amount of time onto the timer. This means there's always a benefit for the Rebels to move faster, and the same can be said for the Empire when they successfully slow the Rebels down. For example, the Rebels could have 18 minutes to retrieve the data file, or only 6 minutes to blow up the Death Star. Before wrapping up, there's one last thing I need to address. Me being ignorant of Conquest mode wasn't the only thing I got roasted for from that first Battlefront video. I also had this to say. You can tell at a glance that it's Star Wars, which is more than I can say for the newer Battlefront games, so it has that going for it. Which, naturally, a lot of people had problems with. I clearly didn't think through what I was saying, and just wanted to say something about the visuals. After playing the 2015 Battlefront for a considerable amount of time, the top-notch quality of the graphics, paired with the astounding number of unique assets in every map, has me singing a different tune. It all looks amazing, but what really put it over the top for me were the maps in the DLC. Jabba's palace has an outrageous amount of care put into it, and hopefully by stretching out this sentence a little longer, I can show off more of the map. Bespin is sleek and gorgeous. I've already gone over it, but the color palette differences between the 3 maps was really something special. The Death Star blew me away, both the interior and the exterior. When I first got Battle Station to show up, I literally did nothing but stare at the screen with a grin on my face. The space dust and asteroids and debris and just, it's all incredible to look at. The interior, with its clinical sheen, bright wasteful lights costing the taxpayers trillions, and fun droids placed all about, caused me to stop and gush regularly while playing. Scarif also looks great, and it being near a beach with tropical trees provides a different kind of nature landscape opposite of Endor. All of that being said, I have two major complaints about the visuals. The first is simply the lighting, or fake camera lens effects, or something. I don't know the exact terms for these kinds of things, but I don't think exterior areas should be a blinding white light while you're indoors or in a cave. I understand what they were going for, trying to mimic how our eyes would adjust to the light once we transition from dim to bright, but this is taken to the extreme. This causes the players in the bright light to have the upper hand, as they can see everybody inside, while the opponents can't see a damn thing. I would at the very least think this should be equal, where if you're standing in broad daylight, caves and dimly lit interiors would be nearly pitch black to balance it out. It can even happen when indoors as well, so maybe it has to do with the amount of white on screen in an area. I don't quite understand it, but that's not my main issue with the visuals. As good as everything looks, as many unique assets as there are, this probably had something to do with the load times lasting as long as they currently do. This is on a PS4, so there should be no accusation of my hardware not being good enough. Remember those tutorial missions from earlier that take maybe 4 minutes to complete? It takes 43 seconds to load in, and 30 seconds to load back to the menu. From clicking the Bespin DLC, it takes 30 seconds to get to the lobby screen, then 1 minute 10 seconds to get into the game. Maybe if the visuals were a little less shiny and there were a few fewer unique assets, perhaps the gameplay wouldn't be interrupted for this obscene length of time. Bewilderingly, in those load times, before and after the game is done, you can't do anything. It takes 1 minute 23 seconds to get from the end of one game to the pre-game of the next. That would be a perfect opportunity to customize your loadouts and check out Hutt contracts, but of course you can't do anything. You just have to sit there, staring at a few stats from the previous game. It's kind of funny that the screen right before this one, where it shows you a few of the Hutt contracts, goes away lightning quick. Maybe I'm alone in this, but I really don't care how many star card uses I had, or even how many points I earn. I want to see my Hutt contract progress. Why does the third contract only stay on screen for 2 seconds? If all that gameplay-related loading screen nonsense wasn't enough, there's one more egregious load time that takes the cake. It takes a staggering 61 seconds to load into the diorama screen. This should be something that players can reference quickly before and after they play. A quick glance should be all it takes, and that's that. It's frankly unacceptable. These load times are the worst part about the experience, and it's not even close. I've heard that the load times for Battlefront 2 are just as bad, which is unfortunate. Maybe it has something to do with the engine they're using. That small worry aside, I am looking forward to playing Battlefront 2. Once I actually gave Battlefront 2015 a decent shake, and with the help of the Season Pass, I think I was able to find a few bits of fun that could be had with this game. I still don't think it stacks up to the original Battlefront games at all, and the marketing and business decisions behind the scenes are in my opinion irredeemable, but all that being said, the game does manage to be a competent online shooter with a gorgeous Star Wars skin. There really ought to have been more offline content, more effort should have gone into survival mode overall. The progression system deepens the gulf between new and veteran players, which can cause frustration. It takes too long to unlock many of the more interesting weaponry. Conquest mode should have been in the game. The many different game modes all feel similar, and only a few of them from the DLC manage to do anything worthwhile. The heroes are ridiculously cheesy in ways where it can feel unfair, and the load times are absolute shit. That being said, the visuals look great, the Star Wars sounds are there like you'd expect, Walker Assault, Battle Station, and Infiltration are at least somewhat refreshing game modes, the Hutt contracts can be kind of fun to complete, and a few of the star card combinations, item pickups, and hero abilities can provide some depth depending on the game mode. In many ways, this reboot was a slap in the face. You could say their overconfidence was their weakness. In some ways, I found their lack of faith disturbing. They basically said, I'm altering the deal, pray I don't alter it any further. I thought they smelled bad on the outside. These aren't the droids you're looking for. It's not impossible. I used to bullseye womp rats in my T-16 back home, and they're not much bigger than 2 meters. What was I saying? Thanks so much for watching this far into the video. This is going to be a longer than normal outro, so I'll play a montage of times where I died by my own stupidity to go along with it. I hope you stick around. First of all, a big thanks to my Patreon supporters. I'm now at 3 in total, which is super exciting. Don't let my tone fool you. These videos take a lot of time and work, and I hope that translates to what you see on the screen. If you wanted to support me on Patreon, I would of course be most appreciative, as I would like to get videos out in a reasonable time frame, and the only way is if I quit my job. Secondly, there is going to be a Battlefront 2 video, but I can't guarantee it will be anytime soon. Going into something as massive as Battlefront 2015 was extremely daunting, took forever to do, and was exhausting. Battlefront 2 is so much bigger from what I can tell, which means not only do I need some more time to not play the game, just so I can come at it with fresh eyes, but I'll also need a lot of time playing the game, like a lot more time. So yeah, I urge you to subscribe if you haven't already, check out my other videos, and patiently wait for Battlefront 2. If you're from the future and it's already uploaded, there you go. Go watch that. I'm sure it's good. Lastly, I want to showcase some other people at the end of videos I expect to be popular. I feel like I've gotten very lucky with the algorithm, as YouTube seems to show off my Star Wars videos to a lot of people. I know I only have 3,000 subscribers, but that's 3,000 more people than I had a year ago, so fuck yeah, right? So depending on the video, you might find a shout out to some other cool channel that I feel deserves more attention. Drew Doodle is someone I found through their in-depth Pikmin reviews. Their down-to-earth attitude and funny demeanor make every video a joy to listen to, and the drawings they use for their thumbnails and in videos themselves make it a joy to watch as well. There's also usually a section dedicated to highlighting some of the best musical tracks, which is something I look forward to every time they upload a review. Their most recent video is a long-form review of Ocarina of Time. I've watched it, I can vouch for it, it's great. So if you want to watch it, you can click on this card in the corner. Hopefully I remember to add that. They do lots of Nintendo game reviews, which is something that is lacking on my channel, so if you're interested in all of that, they're someone I'd recommend checking out and subscribing to. Alright, that's it. That's everything. I wonder how many comments I'll get about me calling Darth Vader Luke's brother. Probably none, but I'm hoping there are a few. And don't be clever by commenting about it if you've watched this far into the video. You're just trying to do the thing I said because I said it. Well then again, if you were already planning on doing it, don't listen to me. Don't let me change your mind. YouTube doesn't give a fuck what the content of the comment is. It's just one comment either way. You can comment donkey 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 for all I care. But don't comment that because I said it. You have to already want